It is 8:15 on the morning of August 6, 1945. An American plane flies high over a Japanese city. It drops a bomb. There is a tremendous flash of light, then an explosion. The city is rocked by a force equal to 20,000 tons of TNT. At the center of the city, the temperature reaches 6,000 degrees centigrade. The atomic age has begun. Within a matter of hours, 100,000 people are dead. Another 100,000 are wounded. Less than 20% of the population escapes uninjured. Some of the casualties are military personnel, but most are non-combatants. Many are women and children. These people did not deserve such a fate. Could a God of love have permitted so many innocent people to suffer so terribly?
Insight, the religious principles underlying American democracy, the fundamental connection between faith and freedom.
How do you do? My name is Father Kieser. The problem faced by the inhabitants of Hiroshima is as old as human nature itself. For thousands upon thousands of years, men have been asking, why does God allow evil in the world he created? You and I would like to be able to ignore this problem, but we cannot. In different ways, under different guises, we must face it every day of our lives. It may be a headache, the death of someone we love, or the selfishness of a friend that causes us to ask, why did God create this kind of world? Why does he allow these things to happen? The problem, I think, is especially difficult for the Christian, because he is aware as no one else of the immensity of God's love for each of his creatures. But he's also painfully aware of the evil in creation. Suffering is a part of every human life. All men have their burdens. All carry their crosses. Your cross may be a splinter. It may be a telephone pole. But the cross is there. And because it is, so also is the question, why does God allow us to suffer? This is a problem. But it is more than a problem, it's a mystery. God understands it, but we do not. But still we must deal with suffering. We must learn to face it with confidence and endure it with dignity. This is no easy job, but it can be accomplished. It will be accomplished if you learn from the experience of others. And so today let us enter the lives of three people as they come to grips with the problem of evil.
Your name, please?
My name is Tanaka, Dr. Akio Tanaka.
Are you a general practitioner?
No, I am a surgeon.
You were in Hiroshima when the bomb was dropped, weren't you?
Oh, yes. I was just making my rounds at the hospital.
Could you describe for us what happened there?
Well, I had just left a patient's room. I remember very distinctly I was walking down a corridor when there was a tremendous light, like that of a gigantic flashbulb. It filled the whole hospital. And then afterwards came the blast. The blast ripped through the building. Windows were smashed, partitions overturned, the walls buckled. In the other wing, a whole ceiling collapsed.
What about the patients?
Oh, yes, many of them were killed. Crushed by collapsing walls. Others were sprayed by broken glass, very seriously cut. And there was much panic.
Did you recognize any of the people?
Yes. You see, some of them were from my own neighborhood. Then I began to realize the magnitude of the blast. I worried, what about my child? What about my wife? Had they been injured? I was a doctor, but I was also a husband and father. I ran away from the hospital. I ran toward my home. As I ran down the street, every home had been burned, leveled. I find my home, it is gone. I dug in the debris with my hands, and I soon found the bodies of my wife and my son, my only child.
Did you return then to the hospital?
I started that direction, but somewhere along the way I collapsed. I came to, woke up in another hospital.
Well, doctor, were you ill or were you just exhausted?
Oh, no, I was ill. I was beginning to suffer from the unknown radiation sickness, steady vomiting, diarrhea, fever, headaches. Then my hair began to fall out. But the worst sickness was not of my body.
You mean you were emotionally disturbed?
No. I mean, I gave up. I despaired. I lost all will to live. I asked myself, who would want to live in such a world where things like this happen? How could I go on without my wife and child?
Well, what brought this on?
The circumstances, of course. But more than that, I was plagued by guilt.
Guilt? For what?
Oh, for many things. You see, I had been raised a Christian.
You, a Japanese doctor, a Christian?
Many of us in Hiroshima were Christians. But myself, I had never taken the religion too seriously. I wanted to make my own life, to live according to my rules. During medical school, I stopped going to church altogether. I was very busy about other things. I did not seem to need it. I was so concerned with my medical career, I ignored God.
Did you think of God as you lay there in the hospital?
Oh, yes. I was filled with anger, bitterness.
You were angry with God?
Oh, yes, I hated God. I despised him. I blamed God for the death of my wife. I blamed God for creating a world in which innocent people can suffer so. I blamed God for the whole war. I blamed God for all my problems.
Do you still feel that way?
Oh, no. I see things more clearly now.
What do you mean?
I mean, God did not cause the war. We did. If we had lived according to God's rules, all this would not have happened.
Do you think the Americans were playing the game according to the rules when they dropped the bomb?
Oh, no, they were not. But neither were we when we invaded Manchuria, when we attacked Pearl Harbor.
You began then to shift the blame?
Yes. To the nations involved, and to myself. You see, in the ultimate analysis, there are no evil nations. There are only evil men. Men who acted the way I acted, selfishly, maliciously.
You began to take personal responsibility for what had happened.
Well, I had to. I am a citizen, and a citizen is responsible for the acts of his government. I approved of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. When I heard of it, I was very happy. Great Japanese naval victory. So you see, in a true sense, my greed and selfishness helped to trigger the events which led to the dropping of the bomb.
You no longer blame God?
How could I? God gave us our freedom. He tells us how to use it. But he will not force us to obey him. If we misuse our freedom, then we have to suffer the consequences. And that's all there is to it, you see.
And that makes freedom a rather terrifying power, doesn't it?
Freedom is very terrifying, but only when it is misused. When used as God wants it to be used, freedom is the most wonderful power in all creation. It is the power to love.
But what does love have to do with all this?
Oh, very great deal, I think. I think love is the basic solution of the problem.
Would you mind explaining that, Dr. Tanaka?
Well, I think that evil tends to multiply itself, to be prolific, a kind of contagious disease. It can be checked only by meeting hatred with love, by returning good for evil.
That's no easy job.
I know, but it is most satisfying. Most satisfying. I think I have never been so happy before in all my life. Arigato. Thank you.
Your name, please?
Edith Stein.
You're Jewish?
I am.
You say that with pride. Isn't it a crime to be Jewish in the Third Reich?
So I'm told. But I do not take my values from Adolf Hitler. I'm proud of my Jewish blood. I'm proud of my Jewish religious heritage.
How did the First World War affect you? Were any of your friends killed in it?
Yes. The husband of one of my best friends.
You were very close to him?
No, not especially, but I was close to his wife. She was a dear friend. It was her response to his death that so amazed me. amazed me very much.
What do you mean?
I mean, I expected to find her shattered by his death, completely shattered. But she wasn't.
What did you find?
I found a very peaceful acceptance. He's with God, she said to me. Nothing else really matters. It took me a long while to understand what had happened.
What had happened?
Suffering had opened her soul, and God had more fully entered in. This explained her tremendous peace and strength.
How did this affect you, Miss Stein?
This was my first great encounter with the cross of Christ, and with the wonderful divine power it gives to those who bear it. My own belief began to crumble.
You began to believe in Christ?
Yes. Yes, I began to believe.
Did you enter the church immediately?
No, it would be 4 long years before I could take the final step.
What finally brought you into the church?
That is quite a hard question to answer. Only God brings an individual into the church. He has to reveal his love to us. And we, each in his own way and his own time, have to realize that he loves us as persons, and that we can and we must return his love.
What brought you to this realization?
I was visiting some friends in Bergzebern when I happened upon the life of Saint Teresa of Avila. And I started to read it. I couldn't put it down. It was dawn before I had finished.
What did you then do?
The same day, I bought a New Testament, a catechism, and a missal.
You became a convert then. You renounced Judaism in order to embrace Christianity.
I am a convert. I did embrace Christianity, but I did not renounce my Judaism.
What do you mean?
I mean that in becoming a Christian, I did not cease to be a Jew. In accepting Christ, I did not turn away from Moses and the prophets.
Miss Stein, you mean it's possible to be both a Christian and a Jew?
That's right.
You see no contradiction?
No contradiction whatsoever. Christ is the fulfillment of the prophets, and the church is the fulfillment of the synagogue.
Is there then a connection between Judaism and Catholicism?
A very deep one.
How do you mean?
I mean that Jewish people were chosen by God to give the world the Messiah.
There is then an essential link between the Old and the New Testaments.
I think so. All Christians are the sons of Abraham. We are all, as Pope Pius XI reminds us, spiritual Semites.
How did you spend the following years?
From 1922 until 1933, I lectured and wrote.
What happened in 1933?
I entered the convent. I became a Carmelite nun.
You, a Jewish philosopher, became a Carmelite nun?
That's right.
What brought you to that decision?
It did not happen overnight. I'd felt drawn in that direction for many years. I wanted to consecrate all my energies to the service of God. And besides, I figured the world needed my prayers more than it needed my lectures.
Were you happy in the convent?
Oh, yes. My first years in the convent were the happiest ones of my life.
What happened later to diminish your happiness, sister?
Hitler unleashed his campaigns on anti-Semitism.
Did the Nazis know how you felt?
I made no attempt to hide it.
Did this rebellion against Hitler affect your relationship with God?
I think it did. I did much thinking in those days. With the heels of the Gestapo beating on the pavement outside and the sirens screaming by night, I think everyone did much thinking. I began to realize as never before that when all else fails, God remains. His love for his people remains.
Did this realization affect your daily life?
Oh, I think it did. I was no longer afraid of suffering.
What do you mean?
You know, we Jews are experts at suffering. We've done so much of it. Now, I began to see the significance of suffering.
Significance? What do you mean?
I mean that when God became man, he chose to suffer. That's the way he redeemed us. And now, I wanted to be like Christ in every way. If he wanted me to suffer, I was ready.
You mean you sought suffering for its own sake?
Oh, no, suffering in itself is evil. I have always fought suffering in others. Now, I did not seek it as an end in itself for myself, but as a means of expressing love.
Love, then, is the important thing.
Love is the only thing.
How does this affect others?
Oh, it has a great effect on others. We live in the one body of Christ. My growth in love could draw new grace into this body. It could enrich the lives of others.
For whom did you do this?
Well, I did it for Hitler. Most of all, I did it for my Jewish blood brothers. I knew how much they needed spiritual strength.
Did you know it might lead to this, a concentration camp?
I suspected it.
Were you arrested for being a nun?
No.
For being a Catholic?
No.
Why then?
I was arrested because I have Jewish blood in my veins.
Why have they brought you here to Auschwitz?
There is only one reason why people are brought to Auschwitz. We are to be exterminated.
Are you afraid to die?
No. I love life, but I'm not afraid to die. In many ways, I'm looking forward to it. I just want to be with God.
Your name, sir?
I'm Bishop Frank Ford.
Of what diocese?
My diocese is Haki in southern China.
Would you mind telling us, Bishop, what you're doing in this communist jail?
I am charged with spying for the United States, but that, of course, is not the real reason I am here.
What is the real reason?
The communists fear what I represent.
But don't you find this terribly embarrassing? I mean, you, a bishop of the Catholic Church, in a place like this, it's so far beneath your dignity.
I am from Brooklyn. I'm not used to very much dignity, and besides, to be in prison for the sake of Christ, that's no disgrace, is it? I feel it's a privilege.
How long have you been under arrest?
Oh, let's see, about 14 months.
Have you been in Canton all that time?
Most of it. They bounced me around a bit at first, but it's all part of their little game.
What's prison like, Bishop? How do they treat you?
Well, they play for keeps here. We are all being given the treatment.
You mean you're being brainwashed?
I guess you would call it that. They call it re-education.
What's the procedure in this re-education?
Well, they start by putting you in solitary confinement. You see no one. You talk to no one.
How long do they keep you isolated?
About 6 weeks. They stole my watch. They gave me no calendar.
How did you stand it, being there alone all the time?
It wasn't so bad. In fact, I rather enjoyed it. Yes, I did. I haven't had so much peace of mind in quite a long time. But then, you see, I wasn't alone.
What do you mean you weren't alone?
God was with me. They could stop me from talking to other people, but they couldn't stop me from talking to God.
What happens when they bring you out of isolation?
Then they begin the active indoctrination, the re-education.
What do they do to you?
Well, they begin by trying to destroy your basic loyalties. They tried to get me to denounce the existence of God.
Did they succeed? Did you deny the existence of God?
How could I? You can't deny the obvious.
Did they use physical violence?
Yes. Not as much on me as the others. They were afraid I'd die.
Why were they so anxious to keep you alive, Bishop?
Oh, they would like to use me to discredit my church and further their own movement. Sometimes they talk to me about taking a position in their new national church. Oh, great talkers they are.
Does that sound attractive to you?
I can't say I'm tempted. I'm not much of a businessman, but to trade membership in the church established by Jesus Christ for one established by Joe and Lie, that doesn't make much sense to me.
What's the toughest side of prison life, Bishop?
Not being able to say Mass is very hard to take. And then, no detective stories. You see, I like to read detective stories.
How do you feel about the people who've done this to you?
How does a priest feel about his people? I love them, of course. They have been so completely propagandized by the professional Marxists that they have no idea what they're doing. I am rather certain the devil has his hand in here, too.
Well, now, Bishop, not many people believe in the devil these days. He's considered rather old-fashioned.
It may be old-fashioned, but it's true. I don't think you can explain the malice and the cleverness of the dedicated Marxists in any other way.
Can you give me an example?
Oh, there are so many. On the way here from Hackey, we stopped at Hingning. The local communists had ordered a mob to abuse us. They pushed and they shoved and they threw garbage at us and shouted, "Where is your God now? What is he doing to help you? Our God is the devil. Our God has power over your God."
Didn't an exhibition like that scare you?
Oh, of course it scared me. You see, I'm a coward.
But you haven't acted like a coward here. If you were a coward, you would have capitulated a long time ago.
Now, my son, that wasn't my doing.
What do you mean?
I mean, God did it. Without his help, I would have given in a long time ago. But with his help, there's nothing I can't do. Really, there isn't.
When you came to China a long time ago, did you have any idea this might happen?
Yes, I did. My superiors at Maryknoll told me that I had to be ready to die.
Didn't that frighten you?
Of course it did.
Well, then, why did you come?
Because I knew God wanted me to. I knew he would see me through.
Has he?
Of course.
How about the other prisoners, Bishop? How are they holding up?
On the whole, very well, I think. Yes, very well, I'd say. Some of them have used this time of anguish to grow spiritually.
Well, how can an experience like this lead people closer to God?
Well, suffering can show an individual how weak he is, how dependent he is upon God. This is a most valuable realization.
Does it produce any practical effect?
I think so. Those who realize and accept their suffering move closer to God. From him they find they can get the strength they need. The crucial thing, you see, is acceptance.
Well, does this acceptance you speak of characterize all the prisoners here?
No, not all. I'm afraid not. Not all. Some have rebelled against it. Suffering doesn't ennoble that type of individual. It destroys him.
What would you say is the difference between these two types of individuals?
Well, I think it is the difference of love. The bitter type uses suffering as an excuse to fold back on itself and wallow in self-pity and regret. The other type uses suffering to purify and strengthen its love.
What happens to these two types in the long run?
It's a paradox, you know. Those who accept their suffering seem to overcome them. They lose little of the joy of life. But those who rebel against their suffering seem to poison themselves spiritually. In time, they become empty, sterile souls. I feel sorry for them. Very sorry.
As a priest, is there anything you can do for them?
I've tried. But this seems like one of those things people have to see for themselves.
How about the future, Bishop? Do you think your church can withstand this onslaught? Aren't you worried that the communists might destroy it?
I do worry about my fellow prisoners, and I worry about the people of my diocese, but I am not worried about my church. They can abuse it, they can calumniate it, they can kill its priests, but they cannot stop it. In the church, Christ moves through history. His work goes on. It cannot be stopped. They can kill me, but they cannot kill my church. No, sir. They cannot kill my church.
Dr. Tanaka gained great wisdom through his experience of anguish at Hiroshima. Bishop Ford came to a greater reliance upon God in his prison cell at Canton. And Edith Stein made her death at Auschwitz an expression of her all-consuming love for God. In each case, the individual was forced to endure tremendous suffering. In each case, the individual accepted that suffering because it was permitted by God. And in each case, God enriched that person's life through that acceptance. God is so wise, so good, so powerful, that he can draw good out of evil. More than an explanation, suffering demands a presence. The presence of that person who said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will refresh you. For my yoke is sweet and my burden light." Only Christ can give meaning to suffering. Only he can enable you to carry your cross with grace and dignity. And so if your life hasn't given you the fulfillment you expected, if you feel all alone in a world too busy to care, if your body aches and your head throbs with pain, might I suggest you look toward Christ on the cross. He understands what you're going through. Reach out to him. Accept this cross he allows you to carry. Accept it because he wants you to. Accept it because he can use it to draw you closer to himself. In doing so, you will find that that cross ceases to be a cross. It will have become the sweet yoke of Christ himself.
Insight is a production of the Paulist Fathers, a group of Catholic priests who serve their nation as witnesses to the religious truth which underlies American freedom.